Chapter 23. Observing Customs. The world had taken on a new shape since China. Margot had never noticed before so many scars among her fellow students. Within her first 2 hours back at Truman High, she was shocked how easy it was to tell whom amongst them had ever been on a mission, and even within that selection, who had left someone behind overseas. And then there was the gut punch of acting like nothing had changed. Sure, math was easy enough. If anything, diving back into complex and imaginary numbers helped comfort Margot. It was nice to have a reminder that there was something here she excelled at. Save for a painful glance at the empty desk where Liz usually sat, Margot spent the entire remaining hour oblivious to her absence. It was in the changing room before fitness that things really felt different. She had changed alongside Emma on hundreds of occasions, but never in that same room without Liz. Emma seemed to notice it too, a brief whiteness flashing across her face when she opened her locker. Out on the floor there was the obvious lack of red mixed with their sea of navy. Margot could see the pain in Xander's eyes recognizing it with the rest of them, before moving on to normalcy. The whole squad spent the day on pins and needles. Whether that was because of the change or that afternoon's post-mission interviews, Margot couldn't tell. But there was obvious tension with Kent and Emma about sharing their stories to an unfamiliar party. Kent's attitude was forgivable, having to relive what was obviously the worst memory any of them could possibly have. Margot herself was still haunted by the image of Kent returning to the van covered in her remains. Emma, granted she had come out of China with a few bruises and a missing boyfriend, had sat the mission in the safety of the van, and Margot found that excuse less compelling. At least she still had Jordan. Having his hand to comfort her during that day back was a blessing, and during their lunch period they were able to slip away from the others and recite the story of the stairwell one more time, just for Margot's peace of mind. But something about him seemed off too, something he wasn't sharing with her. He seemed less emptied by the loss of Johnny and Liz and more singularly focused, like Emma had been back at the safe house. He ended up late to language that afternoon, shooing Margot ahead so he could stay behind in biology to talk privately with Kelster. About what, he never said, insisting it was unimportant. After language, an SUV picked them up in the circle to escort them to the embassy, where they met up with Xander ahead of a trip to one of the upper floors housing the Ministry of the Constitution. Missions fell under their jurisdiction, and within their jungle of offices, the five were separated into interrogation rooms to have their statements recorded. Despite the kindness of her interviewer and the attempt at making the room feel more hospitable with cushioned chairs and pictures on the walls, Margot was given a painful reminder of her previous time spent interrogated in such a space. Most recently the night of the party, but most painfully the night after her father's arrest. For nearly an hour the man guided her through memories of the mission, starting with their separation from Emma and Xander at the train station. From there she recounted everything as faithfully as she could, until her story was interrupted by a question that she was expecting. Why didn't Jordan inform Xander about what he saw in the stairwell? Margot shrugged, admitting the truth she had practiced. He didn't think Xander would believe it, she stated. He thought it was vital to the mission and didn't think Xander would agree to let him investigate. So he deliberately disobeyed his orders? Yes, she sighed. So did I. The interviewer looked down at his transcript of the audio records, then at his pad full of notes. And this is when he ran into two persons with effects, he asked. Yes, she recited. One was the ambassador's private secretary and the other was some sort of escort. Female and male, correct? Yes, Margot replied before describing them as best she could. Did they give any indication who they were working for? No, she remembered. The woman, the only thing she said was, "We're only here to distract you." The man repeated the sentence. Those were her exact words? Well, if not, it was something very close. He looked back to his notes. And was all this before or after Jordan killed the man? After, she said plainly. What provoked him to shoot? They attacked us, she claimed. The man was a fire elementalist. He used it against us until we could get the upper hand. At which point Jordan fired? Yes. Why'd he shoot the woman? She was starting to vibrate the room again, she recalled. She was trying to collapse the room on top of us. He fired to stop her. The man wrote everything down on his pad before asking about their accents. The conversation moved through the rest of the mission, Margot explaining their escape through the crowd and their attempt at avoiding further attention to get back to the van. Harrowingly, she recounted their witnessing Liz lose connection to her tracker and Kent's bloodied arrival, before Johnny returned over their comms and confirmed her death. During this time, did you hear any of the conversation between the three in the office? The man asked. No, Margot puzzled. We lost our teeth in the stairwell, I told you that. He went on, almost ignoring her answer. Did Xander and Emma give any indication something was happening up in the office? Margot tried to remember. There were gunshots, she stated. A few times they could clearly hear shots in their ears when we couldn't. But nothing about the conversation. No, she denied, confused. Why? Johnny gave no indication of anything wrong with the files. No, she repeated. He said the mission was complete, that Liz was dead, and then he issued the magenta. Did something happen? The interviewer did little to assuage her sudden worry about Johnny. Instead, he moved their conversation to the escape, then the safe house. Her mind still racing about Johnny, she tried to remember everything about their arrival, including the deer and Emma's sudden change of demeanor. When they reached the invasion, Margot did her best to remember details, but to her relief, the interviewer breezed through most of it, seeming far more interested in the details of the mission than anything that came after. A single question caught her off guard. Jordan used the word clones when referring to the attackers. Did you see anything out of the ordinary? No, she remembered. I was busy helping Kent. I didn't get a good look at anyone beside their leader. Can you describe him? She did her best, but the generic qualities of the man's face made for a brief recap. And the others, he continued. Did you notice anything out of the ordinary with them? I told you, she repeated, irritated. I didn't get a good look. The man grunted, turning his attention back to his papers. When it was over, the squad reconvened on the floor lobby. Kent looked far more at peace now that the interviews were over, though Margot could tell Emma was trying to hide her nerves behind a brave face. How'd it go? Xander asked them generally. Various mumblings of assent circled around the others. Is it always like that? Kent wondered aloud. It varies by the mission, Xander explained. Something this high stakes with so many different strings attached. The company just wants to make sure they're thorough in the truth so they can cover the optics when it comes to global affairs. What's the latest with Poland? Emma raised. We didn't start a war, did we? Honestly, I don't know, he returned, pressing the button inside the elevator to take them back to the ground floor. Tensions were high before, tensions are high now. I don't know that anything we did can make things any worse than Chervinsky is making for himself. So long as they can't trace anything to us, the company's in the clear, and so are we. What about the safe house? Jordan added. Did they have any clue who attacked us? Again, I don't know, Xander denied. So long as you told the full truth of what you saw and heard, there's nothing for us to do but leave it to the embassy to take care of. You all know there are groups out there who would kill for our information and technology. My guess is we were unlucky enough to cross paths with them. Just leave it with the embassy to figure out and we have nothing to worry about. Emma turned and caught Margot's eye. They both seemed to be wondering the same thing. When did Xander become such a bootlicker? That night, Xander invited them all over to his house for dinner, with Lisa making them a pasta spread which even impressed Kent, before showing them the latest ultrasound pictures of their baby boy. This did wonders for all their moods. Even Emma, who was always a little hostile toward the idea of children, seemed to loosen at the thought of a little Xander running around the place. Margot had wanted kids for as long as she could remember, though with everything that had happened with her family, the idea had soured in recent years. All she had ever known of parenting was tied up in memories of pain, and despite everything she'd been working through with her counselor, didn't know if she had the strength to ever break that cycle. When they returned to the common room, however, after spending time close with Jordan, and the idea of parenthood fresh in her mind, she fell asleep beside him and dreamt of the future. A brief glimpse at a life where everything she ever wanted was within her grasp. That was the only good night she had all week. Tuesday, their time together was disrupted by Jordan distracted by his effect, unable to blind himself to Emma crying herself to sleep down the hall. When she finally calmed and Jordan was able to do the same, Margot drifted off to a volley of nightmares. Out of the gate, a false waking saw Jordan's face transform into that of her father, followed by the memory of Kent appearing in the van, now sweating blood from every pore in his body. Then she was him, and her mind created the most vivid creation it could of watching Liz gunned down in front of her, life draining from her eyes alongside the promise she had made to keep her safe. The final dream she remembered was the most basic, but covered by the trauma of the previous three was made all the more painful, as night after night one of her most meaningful memories was tainted by the loss of the girl they had left behind. By Thursday, the dream played out in its fullest form yet. After suffering through the other dreams, Margot found herself once again back in their hotel room in Coulter Bay. Liz was on the opposite bed, her legs crossed in a pair of fuzzy white pajama pants. She'd relived this memory every night for the past week, but still the shock of seeing her alive and happy made Margot's breath stop for the slightest of moments. Powerless to take control of her own mouth and change what had happened, she gave in to the memory and watched Liz speak. So just the four of you, then? She'd asked. If you can even call it that, Margot recited. It was literally a year that all of us were in the house together. Andrew was in high school the next fall. Fall, Liz repeated mockingly, her crooked teeth smirking over the top-bottom lip. Autumn, Margot corrected, rolling her eyes emphatically. You take so many shortcuts with language here, Liz smiled. I'm surprised you don't call summer sun hot or something ridiculous like that. Hey, I'm Canadian, Margot defended. Don't blame me. Liz grinned, her eyes sparkling. Don't you call your coins loonies and toonies? Margot blushed. Shut up. Liz took a look out their window, catching another view of the mountains. So, tell me about Quebec, she sighed. My dad called it Canada's Scotland one time. Margot frowned. Do I have to? What's the name of your town again? She persisted. Margot sighed. Laval, she started. It's practically Montreal, but just on the other side of the river. What river? Liz wondered aloud. Sorry, my grasp of Canadian geography is stiflingly poor. Margot sat up straighter, drawing a sort of map in the air. She traced around the Great Lakes and drew a line out to where the ocean would be. So the lakes connect to the sea by the Fleuve Saint-Laurent, she explained. And roughly here is Montreal, and there's a bunch of other rivers that sort of converge around it, making a bunch of little islands. Montreal's on the biggest one, and then if you jump to the west over the Rivière des Prairies, there's a second island. Laval's on that one. Liz narrowed her eyes. Sorry, did you say River of Paris? Prairies, Margot articulated, realizing that her habit of reverting to French pronunciations was probably confusing for a non-speaker. Blimey, you grew up in a swamp too then, Liz noted. Might have been a long time ago, Margot conceded. Nowadays it's all urbanized, so you hardly ever notice the rivers unless you're downtown or on top of them. Liz was listening intently. What about Cambridge? Margot asked. That's the one with the university, right? Well, yeah, but I'm actually from Ely, Liz corrected. Seeing Margot struggling to follow, she made her own air map. Cambridgeshire, that's our county, right? It's like our state, so if Cambridge is Cheyenne, then Ely's sort of like our Casper. Margot nodded. Okay, so tell me about Ely. Liz smiled nostalgically. It's like you said with rivers, she explained. Everything around Ely is super bloody flat, even flatter than Tylersville. It's all cereal farms. A few hundred years ago, actually, it was an island. Everything around it used to flood with the tides, but they figured out a way to drain it, so now there's all just like this swampy farmland. So what do you do for fun there? Margot japed. Go for walks with bowls of milk? Knock it, Liz blushed. No, there's still rivers around it. Most of the fun's on the Great Ouse. You have a river called Ouse? O-U-S-E, Liz clarified. And yes, that's where we do most of our summer punting. Okay, now you're just making up words. Do you not have punting in Canada? We don't have it in the States either, Margot laughed. What the hell is punting? Oh, come off it, Liz sighed. You know, a punt, like a boat. You mean boating? No, Liz laughed, struggling to get across her explanation. It's like a flat boat, and you have a long pole in the water, and you use that to push your way down the river. Margot continued to shrug. Like a gondola? No, Liz shouted again, realizing her explanation was getting her nowhere. Forget it. Yes, we go boating on a river called Ouse. Margot smiled. Who's we? Well, my family, obviously, Liz went on. The 8 of us. A blush flashed over her face, quickly replaced by a shade of white. Margot frowned. I thought you were the second of 5. Liz opened her mouth twice before trying on the third attempt. I am, she slowed, a dark pain showing in her eyes. She looked at Margot cautiously, struggling with some kind of decision, before putting her eyes to the ground and sighing. My older brother Aiden. He died. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder and drastically silent. A wall of tears was crowding behind Liz's eyes, desperate to break away. Help, she seemed to whimper without words. Margot wanted nothing more than to jump to the other bed and hug her. Instead, she took the more constructive approach. Renee and Jason, she sighed. Liz looked up, confused. What? My siblings, Margot explained. My sister Renee would be 12 now. Jason would be 10. I have no idea where they are. A tear fell from Liz's eye, her hand hastily shooting to her face to catch it. What happened to them? She said. Margot sighed compassionately. I'll tell you about mine if you tell me about yours. She shot awake, breathing heavily. The bed spread over her had changed from white to black, and despite immediately recognizing where she was, Margot turned to her left in a desperate attempt to see Liz still sitting there on the other bed. To her frustrated expectation, she was met by a windowed wall, fogging over with the chill of the late-night frost. Her breathing slowed enough to turn the other way, where she found Jordan lying face up on his pillow, his white eyes wide open. What's up? She breathed, struggling to hide the panic in her sudden return to reality. Jordan kept his eyes staring at the ceiling. Silently, he whispered, She's still crying. It took Margot a moment to realize he meant Emma, her mind still focused on the memory of Liz. His voice was stoic, but there was an air of worry in it. So what? So look at the clock, he sighed. Margot turned her head to the dresser on the right. In bright red digital numbers, the clock read 3 o'clock. She's been crying this whole time? Margot raised. Jordan's silence confirmed her answer. Just go to bed, she insisted. I can't, he grunted. Why not? He finally turned his head to face her. Even in the darkness, she was able to see the red veins coloring his eyes. "Because she's thinking the same thing I am," he sighed. "Stop it," Margot tensed. "They're not dead." "Prove it," he scowled. "You can't, can you?" Margot couldn't help rolling her eyes. "Jordan, just because I can't prove something doesn't mean it isn't real." "Who are you, Emma?" He rolled over angrily. "Jordan!" She tried reaching for his hand, but he snapped it to his front, rolling onto his feet and standing beside the door. "Every time I close my eyes, I can hear them screaming," he said. "If both of them are alive, neither of them are home, and I can't imagine a world where that means good news." "Jordy, that doesn't mean they were captured." "Doesn't it?" he shrieked, pointing in the direction of Emma's room. "Explain why she's crying, then. If anyone knows the danger he's in, it'd be her. Maybe she's just not allowed to tell us." "Stop it," Margot growled, sitting up to face him directly. "Stop thinking there's always something going on when there isn't." Even in the dark, she could see the look of incredulity spread across his face. "Isn't there?" Margot huffed. "I told you what you saw didn't mean anything," she repeated. "I already explained it like 100 times. I'm not talking about Kent," Jordan clarified. "I'm talking about you covering for her over and over. Maybe she just misses him," Margot insisted. "Maybe instead of imagining him having his fingernails ripped off by some Vietnamese torture master, she actually just misses her boyfriend. Is that really that hard to imagine?" Jordan turned away, masking his reaction in shadow. "What would you do if I was gone, huh?" she incited. "Because honestly, Jordan, if I was in Emma's shoes, I don't know if I could live with myself." "Not knowing if I was alive or dead?" he listed. "Exactly. Now you know how I feel." "That's not what I meant," she begged. "You know it's not." "Yeah, well, you made my point pretty clear." "Jordan, stop," she backtracked. "Johnny's fine." "Those people were after him, Mar," he barked. "Do you think they were alone? Someone sent them specifically to find him. You heard what they said." "Who?" "The clones," he shouted. "The people who broke into the safe house." Margot rolled her eyes again. "Stop it with the clones." "Why?" he raised. "Kelster doesn't think it's impossible. I talked with him about it on Monday." "They weren't clones," she matched. "For God's sake, listen to yourself talk." "They were identical, Mar," he brandished. "You tell me what else it could possibly be." "No, they weren't," she stated, remembering a detail that had evaded her until only now. "One of them had a hook in his nose, remember?" "Yeah, so he broke it at some point," Jordan continued. "Everything else about them was exactly the same, down to their freaking weight, and trust me, I checked. What else could it possibly mean?" "That they were brothers?" she reasoned. "Or cousins? Or they just looked the same? Or maybe they were a really massive set of twins like someone suggested. Or maybe, just maybe, they were wearing really good matching disguises. I mean, honestly, did any of us actually check?" Jordan's face returned to the light, where she could see the slightest shade of pink crossing over his scar. She concluded. "I mean, really, Jordan, why do you always have to run with the craziest idea instead of thinking maybe there's an actual reasonable explanation?" "Fine. Don't believe me," he huffed. "But what did they want with Johnny?" Margot sighed. "I don't know." "Exactly," he swallowed. "I was right about the stairwell, wasn't I?" Without expecting an answer, he turned to the door and put his hand over the handle. "Where are you going?" she asked. "You can sleep by yourself tonight," he ordered. "This is your room." "Yeah?" he laughed. "And like everything else in my life, you've taken control of it too. I'm sleeping on the couch." Before she could even conjure a response, he was out the door. Furious, Margot flipped her shoulder to the door, leaving her trapped and alone facing the empty window. Her irritation was quickly replaced by a dread for the nightmares, and she spent the rest of the night staring out at the snowy horizon to avoid falling back asleep. The next morning, Jordan acted like nothing had happened. He continued to hold her hand in public, though every moment they spent alone there was an air of awkwardness between them. Even a quiet whisper of apology went unrecognized, as Jordan turned away to focus on something besides her. Friday's afternoon training session was replaced by their post-mission ceremony. The four of them made their way back to the residential center after language, where they each found a Navy suit laying out on their beds. Official military customs were rare in the company, but the ceremonies were the main exception. Today they would dress in their service blues and stand in front of the Minister of the Constitution, who would feign congratulation for the success of the mission and pin to their shoulders a meaningless reward for their service. Margot was far less familiar with the military dress than the others, but understood from the separate piles beside the jacket that she had the option to wear either a matching skirt or pants as part of the ensemble. Normally the skirt would have given her comfort in her own confidence, but with the shadow of Liz hanging over the mission, Margot thought it might read as inconsiderate. Besides, it was freezing outside, so she opted instead for the pants. In bulky black shoes, Margot made her way to the bathroom to tighten her hair into an organized braid. Despite the tailor's best attempts, the coat and pants did little to accentuate her figure, which he figured was for the better. Her chest was bare save for her silver name badge, though she knew the other side would be further covered at the ceremony with the addition of new service medals. Out in the common room, Jordan was fussing over his hair. "Are you sure we don't have service caps?" he shouted frantically as soon as Margot closed the door. "Yes, Jordy," she sighed. "Have you ever seen anyone here wear a service cap?" "What's a service cap?" Kent's voice came peeking over the living room couch, his casted leg hitting below a bulky pant leg Jordan must have helped struggle with. Margot turned to explain, but was interrupted by Xander, who emerged through the front door dressed in his own uniform. Before he could speak, Jordan moaned, "And my hair is out of rags!" Xander's pink face looked around at Margot and Kent. "That makes 3 of us," he noted. "They don't really care, you know." Margot rolled her eyes at Jordan. "Stop being such a military brat." Emma's door opened and she emerged to join them. "What are those?" Kent wondered aloud, distracting Margot from her train of thought. Xander looked around before realizing Kent was pointing at his shoulders. "What, my butter bars?" he replied. "It's my service rank. What about those?" Kent lowered his finger toward Xander's chest. "Those are service medals," Jordan grumbled. "Don't you know anything about the military?" Kent didn't even open his mouth to respond. Everyone in the room knew the answer. "I used to know them all," Xander mumbled, tucking his chin into his tie to get a better view of his own chest. He pointed to a white patch with a blue and red cross pattern. "This one's Norway, I know. Emma probably has them all memorized." "Just the ones Andrew has," she explained. "I recognize East Africa and France." "Those are locations," Kent noted. "I thought you said they were service medals." "Those are the places he served," Jordan spoke, in a tone that Margot remained unimpressed by. "The company doesn't have merit awards. That's what the ranks are for." Xander pulled on his shoulders. "I've had multi-level promotions a few times," he recognized. "Don't expect to get much further than private after your first set of missions." "How many are there?" Kent continued. "Like 40? Jordan wondered aloud, further interrupting a conversation that was hardly his to join. Something like that," Xander accepted. "This is about halfway up the chain, a second lieutenant." Kent looked between Xander and Jordan. "What happens when you get to the top?" Xander blinked. 5 stars? He echoed. "It's not impossible, but it's pretty rare. I want to say there are 3 active within the company. How close is your brother?" The eyes in the room shifted to Emma, who was pulling at the hem of her skirt. "Andrew?" she returned. "He's sitting at a 2 after Poland." Xander returned his attention to Kent. "Once you reach any sort of general position, you basically outrank anyone else in the company except the embassy," he noted. "You get certain privileges when you reach the officer ranks, and those only increase the higher you go. Mission priority, more freedom to orchestrate your own missions, less punishment for diverting chain of command, that sort of thing." Kent turned to Emma. "Your brother's a 2-star general?" Jordan interjected before she could. "What, did you think they just gave him the assassination for fun?" "If it had been successful, he'd probably be a 5-star, Emma shrugged. Kent's mouth was open. He turned back to Xander. "You're telling me a 17-year-old is ranked higher than you are?" "I'm pretty sure Andrew's 18, isn't he?" Xander joked, turning briefly again to Emma. "But yes, he is. Granted, he's been on about twice the number of missions I have, so that accounts for most of it." "Andrew's the most decorated person in the company," Emma bragged. "Among the students, at least." "Even Shane Daniels never reached general by the time he left," Xander voiced. "I should know, I graduated with him. Plus, I can't really get promoted anymore now that I'm out of my active service years." Margot could see Kent trying to follow Xander's explanation, the conversation shifting to Andrew's near dozen missions he had completed in his quick 4 years of high school. Sure enough, when they saw him in person that afternoon upon reaching the city auditorium, he was dressed in his full uniform, his breast covered in a plaque of overwhelming colors. Emma was pulled away by her mother as soon as they arrived, while Jordan continued to prey upon Kent's lack of knowledge about the company's customs. Shane had arrived wearing his dull green Marine uniform, so Jordan took to explaining how military service took precedent over company service, leaving Margot alone with Andrew, grateful for someone different to talk to. "Nice stars," she complimented, noticing his shoulders. "Thanks," he voiced dully, turning his head before straightening one of the medals. "You know, I think I'm actually going to try to beat you by the time I'm done," she joked. Andrew cracked a smile. "Go right ahead," he grinned. "I'm finished." He looked over at Shane, who was speaking to a number of embassy officials, before adding, "I heard you did good work on your first one." Margot broke a smile of her own in return. "Oh, yeah," she agreed sarcastically. We disobeyed direct orders, ended up killing half a dozen people, and all it cost was 2 of our squad." He tilted his head. "Beats 6, he offered casually. "Besides, we all know why you 2 disappeared out the back door." He snuck an obvious glance over at Jordan before winking. Screw off, she sighed, struggling to hold back a smile of her own. Don't joke about that. It's the only way I know how. Did Jackie teach you that? She wondered aloud. Combination, he replied, trying to find healthier vices. Well, you're looking a lot better, at least. I'll take a compliment however I can get one. Margot glanced down at the marble floor, noticing how polished Andrew's shoes were compared to her own. So you're really done? She asked. Andrew eyed her somberly. Can't really serve without a squad, he noted, before looking over at the front doors, where the Prime Minister had just entered. Besides, even if I wanted a high note to end on, Dad thinks it's best if I move on. To what? I don't really know, he explained. Grades have tanked for months, obviously, but if I show any kind of improvement, I think he'll work his magic on the record books. He pointed to the rainbow on his chest. These mean I can pretty much get in wherever I want. Any thoughts? We're touring San Diego in March, he said. I figure I can walk onto the swim team and do what everybody else does. Push the effect just enough to be competitive, but keep it out of suspicion. Is Isla going with you? Andrew's face suddenly turned white. No, he breathed awkwardly. We broke up. Again? Why? Same old, he replied, an absent look returning to his eyes, which Margot took as a sign to drop the subject. After a few seconds of silence, she offered, Well, I'll miss you. No, you won't, he smirked again. Of course I will. I'll be back, he argued. Nobody ever escapes this place for good. The crowd had begun filing through the lobby, and Margot took the hint to leave Andrew to join her squad, who were being led to the very front row of the amphitheater just in front of the stage. Very rarely was the building full for a post-mission ceremony, and today was no different. The cavernous space with its multiple balconies practically empty, save for their squad, Emma's family, and a handful of embassy employees sitting up on their own. Visitors were welcome. Margot herself had been in attendance for the first few of Andrew's, but on a Friday afternoon most people had better things to do than sit through an event with all the pomp and atmosphere of a funeral. The absence of Liz was felt as soon as they had sight of the stage. Hanging just to the side of the stage opposite the speaker's podium was a bright red uniform, the inverse of their own. The name plate over the breast was impossible to read at their distance, but everyone in the auditorium knew what it read. Granhook. Whether to comfort each other or in need of comfort themselves, Jordan and Margot found themselves side by side, instinctively reaching their hands together as they sat between Em and Kent. Just as they were about to take their seats, a recording of both the American and British national anthems played, forcing them back to their feet, before awkwardly shuffling back down as Tate Schuler took the podium, who stood looking between his pages of notes and the embassy employees with the nervous expression of someone trying to avoid an accidental insult. He began with the standard, "On behalf of the Ministry of the Constitution" script she remembered from Andrew's ceremonies, before going into a description of their original mission plan devoid of any serious detail. The description ended with the barest mention of the events at the safe house, with Schuler stating they had overcome unseen adversity to ensure a safe journey home. Margot felt another stab of pain when he formally announced that Liz was officially confirmed dead. Her body had been recovered by a team from Germany earlier that week. The slight sense of relief at this news was shadowed by the realization that Schuler had skipped over Johnny entirely, with the rest of the squad tensing in their seats as they all seemed to understand the same thing. Alive or dead, Johnny's uniform should have been on display alongside Liz. Before any of them could say anything, Jordan was called onto the stage, awkwardly standing in front of the red uniform as Schuler noted Jordan's accurate response to danger despite disobeying orders from Xander, and awarded him a 2-rank promotion to private second class. His shoulders decorated with a single arrow and 2 colors attached to his chest, Jordan returned to Margot only to be replaced on the stage by Kent, who limped to position awkwardly before being awarded the same double promotion. Margot was called next, staring blankly into the dark auditorium, unable to see anything beyond the bright stage lights glaring down on her. Schuler said something about trusting her squad, being creative in the face of adversity, and taking charge in a crisis, before, to her utter shock, he announced her a 3-place promotion. As she stood there in confusion, still distracted by Johnny's missing uniform, the minister reached into her jacket to fasten the 2 partnership medals on her chest, before adorning her shoulders with the double arrows of private first class. The others were just as bewildered as she was, Jordan almost jealously so. She took her seat beside him as Emma took the stage, lauded for her efforts in conquering the danger at the safe house, though she too was only raised to second class. Margot felt like every eye in the room was watching her, and not in a way she enjoyed. Her attention was instead drawn to Emma, who whispered something to Schuler as he was pinning the medals to her jacket. He did his best to hide the slightest shake of his head from the rest of the auditorium, but sitting right in front of the stage, Margot not only saw it, she understood its meaning entirely. Not here. Emma shut her mouth and obeyed as he finished adding an arrow to each shoulder, taking her seat just as Schuler called Xander to the stage. Due to ignorance or sheer incompetence, Margot couldn't say, but Xander opened his mouth louder than Emma had. What about Liz? He said, his voice echoing around the room. Beside her, Margot could feel Jordan stand to join him. What about Johnny? He blared. Where's his uniform? Schuler struggled to hide the embarrassment on his face, looking up to the crowd of embassy employees who had begun to stir behind them. He glared at Jordan and Xander before mouthing, "Sit down." "Tate, what's going on?" It was Mr. Guerin's voice, flying down the side aisle and making his way up onto the stage. Clearly something was wrong. The noise from the crowd behind them was no longer a whisper. Schuler moved from the podium to intercept the Prime Minister sweeping his way to the center, whispering something in his ear before being nearly shoved away. "What?" Guerin shouted. "Why wasn't I informed of this?" Emma made an audible gasp beside her. "What happened to Johnny?" Margot could feel Jordan tense as her own breath caught in her throat. Schuler made another quick glance to the embassy crowd before rushing to the podium to make an announcement. "At the moment, there is no rank acknowledgement in place for Jonathan Sparks and Elysian Granhook, pending an ongoing internal investigation. Clark Xander will receive his medals of partnership from the embassies of Poland and China, and that will conclude today's ceremony." "What?" More than 5 voices layered the word, with the loudest coming from the Prime Minister himself. Schuler turned away from the microphone but spoke loud enough for Margot to hear. "Sir, please, this is brand new information to me too," he said. "Let's get through this and we can discuss details with Mike privately." "You!" Guerin shouted, pointing a vitriolic finger toward the crowd. "My office, now!" To Margot's surprise, it was Shane Daniels who rose, awkwardly shuffling through the row before following Guerin to the door like a punished dog. "Daddy," Emma tried. "Not now," her father growled, shooting her the same finger. "We'll discuss this later." "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Schuler attempted, trying to recover some semblance of ceremony. "If we could—" Emma rushed after her father. Xander was quick to follow, as was Jordan, clearly desperate for some good news about his brother. Margot joined him, and eventually so did Kent. Out in the lobby, Emma had failed to reach the Prime Minister before a vehicle took him away to the embassy. She turned back to them disheartened, only to find Xander shouting in her face. "What did you do?" he screamed. Emma looked to the others for help, but they were just as bewildered as her. What do you mean?" she trembled. "I did exactly what you told me to do." A serious look crossed through Emma's eyes, a look Margot had learned to read carefully over the past 5 years. Emma was lying. Xander's face was fuming, his teeth clenched so hard Margot thought they might shatter. For a moment she thought he might strike her. Instead, he took a deep breath and shook his head to an unsettling calm. "You know, you are the worst kind of person imaginable," he spoke, turning to the rest of them. "The next time I think about trusting her for anything, put a bullet in my brain first." He turned to walk away, exiting the building into the freezing afternoon twilight with Emma chasing behind him. The 3 of them remaining stood in shocked silence, none of them able to comprehend what had just happened. It took the prompting of a lobby security guard and the presence of an SUV outside to get them back to the common room, where they continued to sit awkwardly in the living room, remaining in a state of anxious anticipation for Emma to finally return so they might have a clue as to what was going on. Almost 3 hours later, she came through the front door with flushed cheeks and a furious look on her face. Not even stopping to take off her dress shoes, she stormed into the living room and began screaming at all 3 of them. "Which one of you did it?" she screamed, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Did what?" Jordan replied. "Where's Johnny?" "They still don't know," she huffed. "But someone gave them the impression that he sabotaged the mission himself. They're treating him as persona non grata until he's captured." Margot and Jordan both rose to their feet. "What?" "There's a company bounty to bring him in alive," she continued. "Because someone in this room gave them the impression that Johnny was reselling the files he was supposed to delete for personal gain." "That's not what I said," Kent said, impressively calm. "Oh, good, it was you," Emma berated. "I was worried I was going to have to work for you to tell me the obvious." "Emma," Margot interjected. "I'm sure he did—" "Shut up!" she shouted, keeping her eyes peeled maliciously at Kent. "I told you what would happen if you didn't listen to me." "I did listen to you," Kent doubled. "I did exactly what you told me to do." "Yeah?" she fumed. "Did you just throw Johnny under the bus for fun too? Because I don't seem to remember you ever mentioning him sabotaging the mission before now." "That's because I didn't remember it until now," Kent exhaled, still remaining calm while Emma grew more infuriated by the second. "The guy from the embassy was explaining it to me. He called it traumatic disassociation." "What guy?" Emma growled. "Your interviewer?" "No," Kent clarified. "There was an official from the embassy that walked me through parts of the conversation before my recorded testimony." He shrugged, nonchalant. "A taller guy, red beard." Emma erupted. "You spoke to Mike Richmond?" "Emma," Margot reached out, attempting to stop her from lunging at Kent. "You just let him brainwash you into lying against Johnny like that?" "Emma, it's not a lie," Margot defended. Both Emma and Jordan froze, holding their breaths. They have an audio record of something going wrong in the office, Margot remembered. Whatever was on it, it doesn't paint Johnny in a positive light. I didn't remember the details until Mike played me the tape, Kent started. Kent, stop! Margot commanded with such authority all three of them turned to her. Why? He asked. They want to know the truth, don't they? Because whatever you're about to say, I can't protect you from both of them. All three gave a surprised laugh. What do you mean protect him? Jordan puzzled. Jordan, go to your room, she ordered. You're not the boss of me, he argued. She ignored him completely. Kent, you too. What? I mean it, she demanded. Both of you go to your rooms until everybody learns to calm down. Fine, Kent uttered. He seemed to understand her urgency, getting to his feet and hobbling past the others to his room. The lock clicked shut behind him. Margot turned to Jordan, who was less obedient. Now, she said plainly. Johnny's fine. Take a chill pill and we'll talk about it when you're done. He clearly wanted to say something in retort, but chose to swallow his words and marched to his door, slamming it hard in protest. Johnny is not fine, Emma huffed, keeping her voice low. I know you don't want Jordan to hear it, but if anyone from the company even sees him, it's a crime not to report it. Do you understand that? Johnny's a criminal because of what Kent said. Liz is dead because of Johnny, Margot said bluntly. Emma's eyes were bloodshot. Don't you ever say that to me again. Well, that's what Kent was going to say to you, Margot credited. That's what the tape showed. Shut up, Emma screamed. Kent's a liar. You mean he's your liar, Margot sounded. I'm smart enough to know when you're pretending to be your dad, Em. You standing in the middle of Xander and Ken, lying about who said what to whom, it's pathetic. Shut up, Emma breathed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? Margot wondered. What did you say to him? I didn't say anything to him, she denied. Do you think I'm stupid? Margot laughed. First of all, I'm smart enough to know when a boy is being played. Second, it looks like you forgot all about Jordan again, because he told me all about your little cuddle session on the couch earlier this week. Emma's face went white. Now look, I defended your honor, as little as you might have, by convincing him it didn't mean anything, but obviously it was part of your little game to get what you want by any means necessary. Margot, so what was it, huh? She continued. Judging by your dad's reaction, I'd say he's in some pretty hot water right now. Emma's head dropped, tears suddenly escaping through her closed eyelids. I was just trying to protect him, she sobbed. Margot could feel the heat rising to her face, waiting for Emma to explain herself. She sniffed, keeping her head to the floor. There was a gap in the audio feed surrounding the seizure of the guard, she cried. It made Liz look like she'd murdered him. Xander asked me to coach Kent to clarify the story. Emma looked up at Margot with a look of regret that was almost honest. You're incredible, you are, Margot grilled. Emma's expression turned fearful. You don't have to explain the rest of it, Em. I'm not stupid. Whatever Xander told you to do, you had Kent do the opposite. Only you didn't think you'd get caught so easily. Another pitiful sniffle slowed a second set of tears. Honestly, what did you think was going to happen? Margot asked. That we'd all be fine with the fact that you screwed over our friend? Emma returned her face to the floor, but Margot's voice only grew louder. Liz is going to be buried as a criminal. You know that, right? Whatever Kent said, your dad is still screwed, and now so is Liz's family, because you thought you were smart enough to trick the system. Emma continued sobbing. And you know what I'm most impressed by? Margot finished. The fact that for years, you've had the gall to pretend you're some innocent little church girl who's so high and mighty that you never stoop as low as the rest of us. Since you met me, you've criticized Andrew too. All because of the way we managed to get the things we want, and the whole time, you've just been another player in the game. Emma's face tilted up in anger, blotches of red spreading through her cheeks. Take that back, she growled. No, Margot laughed. I'm tired of defending you. You killed Liz just as much as Johnny did. Take that back, Emma screamed. Margot could see the swing coming from a mile off. She dodged to the right and this time made sure her claws were retracted as she smacked her sister so hard she fell to the ground. Emma struggled to maintain her pride, screaming as many insults as she could find as she clambered back to her feet. I wish we'd left you in Canada! Margot spit in her face as she moved toward the bedrooms. Go to hell, bitch. The sense of victory was drained away as soon as Jordan's door closed behind her. Not only was he seated on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands, he was sobbing, and his hands were folded together in what could only have been prayer. So shocked by the sight of this, Margot froze, struggling to find the words to explain what had just happened with Emma, or where to start about Johnny. That was when the alarms went off.